All right. Well, we are back here at the Football Lounge. We have a special guest, go way back, Mr. Adam Rossow, who's now a reporter out in the Austin, Texas area covering sports, formerly Hawkeye headquarters with me there in the Quad Cities covering Iowa Hawkeye athletics. So, Adam, thank you so much for joining me, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Excited to talk some December football and January football here coming up.
Yeah, no kidding. It's kind of getting crazy down to the point. We were chatting a little bit earlier just about some of the teams, and we've texted back and forth over the past recent weeks about how things are shaking out. It's crazy. We have only one team in the AFC that's clinched a playoff berth, and we have five in the NFC that have clinched. So the races are really a lot different this time of year. But I am curious, are there more, like, what would you say the ratio of Cowboys to Texans fans you're seeing out in the Austin area?
I mean, Austin's got a lot more transplants than most of the rest of Texas, maybe outside Dallas. So there's a little bit more variety in fandom here, but it's definitely at least 70% Cowboys fans, if not higher. It's just been the legacy team. Obviously, when the Oilers left Houston and went to Tennessee, I think that probably turned people off. And I don't know if they've, adopted the Texans as much as they might outside of the Houston area, but also the Texans now, after the last couple of years with Deshaun Watson and that saga, they're one of the four worst teams in the league. So, I think the Cowboys always have that following, but now this year with them, having a pretty solid team, I think that's brought a lot of Cowboys fans back out of the woodwork a little bit. So they're definitely excited about the way this season's shaping up and how they have a more complete team than they've had in the past.
Well, hey, given how Davis Mills appeared to look like a future Hall of Famer this past week, maybe the Texans fans will grow in the area as well. But yeah, no, the Cowboys for sure are one of those teams that's kind of appearing to be a legitimate threat in the postseason. They were a team that I kind of felt like, I wouldn't say we're like frauds or anything like that, but just a team that they had a really easy schedule this year, and the way they lost was concerning a lot of times. It seemed like they had to rely on Zeke and Pollard to do a lot of the damage. But, and I picked them to win 12 games coming in just because of their schedule, because of the division, all that. And it looks like they will probably be 12-5. We'll see if they can get to 13 wins. They're at 11-4 right now. But really, I think kind of what surprised me more is just how they've gotten better as the year's gone on. Whereas in the past, it's kind of been the opposite. I mean, what would you say your gauge is on this team? Particularly because the defense has been so good as of late too. Trayvon Diggs getting his 11th interception this past week against Washington. Just, what's your overall gauge on this team and where they can go?
I'm kind of with you. I think, we knew they were going to have a good offense as long as Dak came back, as healthy or close to as healthy as he'd been 2 years ago, or even the beginning of last season before he got hurt. But I think that the big difference is what Dan Quinn has done with that defense. And obviously Micah Parsons, who's going to be the defensive rookie of the year. The way they use him, move him around, he rushes the passer, he covers people, he stops the run. He's just one of those defenders you don't take off the field. And I think his presence, has made that back end with Diggs and with, Keanu Neal, some of those guys that have been solid players, but not like this level of good.
Yeah.
His presence has really transformed that defense. Dan Quinn has a pedigree. He knows how to put guys in positions to be successful. So I think that's where Dallas to me is more intriguing than they've been in years past, because what was it a few years back with Dak and Aaron Rodgers, 35-31, 38-35. I don't think Dallas wants to play that game anymore. And I think in the playoffs, you're not going to be able to play that game against Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. I mean, the Bucs don't even want to play that game. They didn't even want to play that game that much last year. It's much more lean on their, defensive line with Parsons and then be opportunistic in that secondary. So I think Dallas is interesting. I will say, they've had a couple games where they've laid eggs. The game against Denver at home really comes to mind. Last week they looked like they couldn't, they would have beat the 85 Bears last week the way they played, right? But I think it's for me, the interesting thing is going to be how their offensive line holds up against some of the other defensive fronts. That's, you look at the NFC especially, that's really the going to be the game in January, is how whose offensive line holds up against the opposite defensive line, whether it's the Rams, because they got a great D line, but their offensive line has kind of been moving parts around. The Bucks still should have a great offensive line, but it just all depends on the matchups and how they hold up, because obviously you saw New Orleans shred their offensive line a couple weeks ago. So it's just, it's an interesting case. And I think Dallas is like, just like the top 2 or 3 teams in the NFC, they're all pretty similar, and it's going to come down to that matchup up front.
Yeah.
And who can rattle the other team's quarterback.
It's interesting how a lot of, and outside of maybe a couple teams, a couple anomalies like the Chiefs or whatnot, the regular season over the past several years has been all about, the flair and the offensive dominance. But then when you get to the postseason, you play people that are on that level with you, it does revert back to just, fundamental football, right? It really does go back to the battle in the trenches, and that's often what wins these games, not necessarily all the flash and the flair, because with that comes a lot of mistakes that when you're playing these teams, they're much more opportunistic than maybe random opponents during the regular season. So the Cowboys clinched the division. That comes as no surprise. They sit there at 11-4, and they do still have a shot at the 1 seed, but that belongs to the Packers right now at 12-3. In your opinion, and obviously, they put a hurting on the Browns this past week, and the Packers really just seem to be rolling over the last several weeks, really. They are now on a 4-game win streak at the right time. They have the Vikings and the Lions coming up, 2 divisional games, none that really probably scare them at all, getting to end the season at Detroit as well. So, 13 wins certainly seems that's what's going to be the mark for Green Bay. 14 is probably likely as well. Do you think they stay here in the 1 seed? Do you think they are the team that is going to force the rest of the NFC to go through Lambeau in this postseason run? Where do you think the Packers kind of stand in terms of the hierarchy, not just in the standings, but just overall talent? Like, do you think they are, in fact, the best team in the NFC?
I think they'll get the 1 seed. I don't think the Vikings, the Vikings will play them tough this week. They're obviously playing for their playoff lives. Really, if they lose this week, it kind of doesn't, I don't think, end their chances, but it takes a lot of help to get in. The Packers, to me, the interesting thing about that Browns game is with how bad Baker played, they still, they get a call or two. They still have probably a chance to kick a field goal and win the game. So
that's true.
The Packers, to me, and I think the Vikings do this to them. The Browns did this to them. Their run defense kind of ebbs and flows, and I don't know how that's going to hold up long term. Like, let's say they face I know Jimmy G's out, but let's say they face a San Francisco team, or they face, I think the Rams have a underrated running game, especially with how, McVay schemes that generally in the playoffs. Do they hold up against a team like that can, overemphasize the run? Because I can't remember. I don't know what Chubb went for, $160 something last week. Nick Chubb ran all over them, and Baker makes a couple throws. That's a different game. And I know the Browns have one of the better rushing attacks in the league, but the Vikings have done it to him with Cook in the past couple of years. I don't, that worries me a little bit as we talk about offensive and defensive lines and how they hold up in the trenches. I think, what you're going to get with Rodgers and Adams. That the Aaron Jones can make plays. Dillon's emerged as a good kind of change up back. Are they the best team in the NFC? I don't know. I think there's, 4 teams in the NFC that are all pretty equal.
Yeah.
Playing at Lambeau helps, but they haven't gone to the Super Bowl playing at Lambeau. Last time I went to the Super Bowl, they won on the road, right?
Yep.
And then they beat the Steelers. Like it generally hasn't helped them. Now I know last year it was like 40 degrees when the Bucs went up there and beat them. So maybe if they get the right, situation, but they've lost those games to, the Niners with Kaepernick a few years back, won a really cold football game. They've they've not cashed it in when they've had home field, when the Giants would go up there and beat them. So I don't know if, Lambeau 30 years ago is a lot different than Lambeau now. And I can't tell you why with these Packers teams, they haven't been able to do it, but
it might be with like a personality thing from what I like. they are like the kind of chip on their shoulder type of team, right? And sometimes when you're at home, it's like it's harder to fish for that type of mentality because it's like you're at home, you have all the advantage right now. But like Aaron Rodgers obviously operates oftentimes with the mindset of like, it's us versus the world type of thing. It's me versus the world. Maybe that has a part to do with it. Like the road is actually a little bit more comfortable for them sometimes. And there are, a few teams like that. It's interesting. I'm like looking at their schedule this whole year and against current playoff teams, AFC or NFC, all of the current playoff teams, they've won or lost by like one possession, most of them by 3 points. So we're talking about a lot could go one way or the other to your point. The Cardinals, that it was a 3-point game, and the Chiefs was one possession, and the Vikings they lost to by 3. Like there's a lot of those types of games where it's like one thing goes wrong for the Packers, and all of a sudden, maybe they aren't the world beaters that they have been for much of the season. The Rams were one of those teams, Adam, where I thought, starting off that they were going to be the clear 1 seed. Like just coming into the year, I just felt like a lot of things were working in their favor. Obviously, the Cam Akers injury preseason, gave them a hit. Then they lose Robert Woods, bring in OBJ. He's been better, obviously, recent weeks. And Matt Stafford's been playing well, but they're kind of one of those teams too that has ebbed and flowed throughout the year. They're right now in the 3 seed. They moved up 2 spots. They clinched the playoffs, but the NFC West is still up for grabs with Arizona hanging around. Are the Rams a team that in your mind, like, are they one of those teams? Because for me, I could see them going to the Super Bowl. I could also see them losing, like a wild card game, like right away. Like they are a hard team to gauge. I don't. Do you have a clear picture on them? Like where do you think their prospects are for this year?
They're another team. I think you're right on matchup based. Like for some reason they can't handle San Francisco. They haven't beaten them 4 or 5 straight times for whatever reason, but then they've, like going back to last year, they play Seattle where like they frustrate with Russell Wilson or something. They're a very matchup based team. I don't know enough of the details as to why it seems that way. Like Green Bay seems to have their number. Rodgers really isn't phased by their defensive front that much. It doesn't seem like. So I don't know. I do think that Stafford concerns me a little bit just because we haven't seen him do it. Now, not some of that's not his own reasoning. Did he play 2 playoff games in Detroit, 1 or 2?
Yeah, I think it was 2 playoff games. Yeah, lost both.
It's not all his fault that they didn't get back there as much. But I don't know. You saw it a little bit last week with the Vikings game. Like they are a better team than the Vikings. They don't get that punt return. They might have lost just because Stafford didn't play well.
Yeah. So, a lot's going to hinge on him.
And I would say of the 5 playoff teams, either him or he'd probably be my 5th choice to be the quarterback. I mean, of the top 5 seeds there, you would obviously take Rodgers and Brady over him. I would probably take Dak and Kyler over him just because of the versatility he gives you, not because of any pedigree, but he's got to prove it to me, and he's going to have to win at least 1 road playoff game, if not 2, to get to the Super Bowl. So, it's there. He's an interesting case because I do think, they're the defensive front with Donald, and then, obviously having a number 1 corner helps them, but their O-line, like I said, has been a little banged up. So Stafford's going to have to make plays. Nobody's going to let Cooper Kupp, go for $120. And if they do, then they're going to shut everybody else down. It's one of those, are they going to let just him throw to Cooper Kupp all day? Maybe, but then nobody else is going to get catches, or are they going to let, bracket Cooper Kupp and then let the other guys try to beat him? So I don't know. LA to me is the most, I think you're right. The most, they could lose right away, or they could go to the Super Bowl. They're not, I don't think they're a team where you can say they need X, Y, and Z to happen. I just think if they get the right matchups, yeah, they might be fine. If not, New Orleans and San Francisco first round for them, to me, would cause some problems just because of their defensive fronts.
Those fronts,
the way they play. Yep.
Definitely. No, I think that's going to be the biggest issue for them. The Bucks sit right after them in the playoff seedings right now. They moved down a spot. Still in the 4 seed. They clinched the NFC South at 11-4. they have the easiest, final two games here. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up sitting their guys the final week if the one seed's not in play. But they take on the Jets and the Panthers the next 2 weeks after getting shut out to the Saints. Again, one of those teams that just seems to be able to turn it on at a random moment. They come back, beat the Panthers 32-6 this past week. The injury to Leonard Fournette really hurts them, I think, because they had something going, really. I mean, we saw the playoff run that Tampa had last year. It was heavily dominated by Leonard, and their ability to run the football. Now they're going to have to rely on Ronald Jones and Keyshawn Vaughn and those guys. Not to mention, Mike, the Chris Godwin injury, Mike, like they really have gotten hurt at the worst time in terms of you really want to bring some momentum into the postseason. But then again, they still have Tom Brady and still really good defense. Do you think that, they'll be hosting a playoff game nonetheless, just given that their schedule is so easy moving forward? I mean, I think 13 wins is pretty much well within reach, if not almost a lock for these guys. And do you see them as, repeating and going back to the Super Bowl this year?
Man, putting me on the spot with that.
I know.
I would say no, because of what you said, the
Yeah.
injuries. I don't think, Godwin being out, they get AB back. Gronk's been banged up. Their defensive secondary still can be had depending on, who's back there, obviously. But I don't know, for some reason after those injuries, I think I agree with you. I got this feeling that, I don't know if they're going to have the magic this year.
Yeah. Just seems like they're crumbling.
I don't think for them, Matt, they're not a team where like they have to play in Tampa for me to pick them, right? Like they could be the 2 seed. I don't know if that matters too much to me, just with the way they prepare, the way Tom prepares, they'll be ready to go. Maybe playing at home will help their offensive line, just not have to deal with noise on offense. But I agree with you. They need, Ronald Jones is a downgrade. Vaughn is an explosive player, but pretty unproven. Like he's the kid that was at Illinois and then went to Vanderbilt, right? Like now he's just kind of been in the league. I don't know. Are they going to get Gio Bernard back? He might help them a little bit more, and in a situation where they need to get the ball out quick and just dump it down, like they used to James White in New England, like because Bernard's a good, pass catching back. He's not going to be a bell cow, but he might be a guy that would help them, diversify on the road if they needed a guy to get the ball out, because that's all they're built on, getting the ball out. Like Tom's not going to hold on to the football. I don't see it. I don't know why. I don't want to pick against Tom Brady. I just don't, for some reason, this feeling this year, I feel like they're going to run into a Dallas front or a Rams front that's going to give them a lot of issues. That has given them a lot of issues, right? The Rams have beaten them, and I think that, Dallas is close to beating them in the first game. I think those two teams to me are poor matchups for Tampa, and I think they're going to get one of them probably in round 2. So that to me is hate to say it, but I don't think the magic's there for Tom this year.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Arizona in a similar way has kind of fallen apart, but not necessarily all due to injury. Although the DeAndre Hopkins, missing him, has seemed to make an impact on this team for sure. But they got Chase Edmonds back. And Kyler Murray was injured for a bit, but he came back. I don't know. It seems like a different Cardinals team, even just without DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not sure if that's been a massive, reason for their decline, but the team's now 10-5, Adam. Like what happened to this team? It just seems like they were so lethal and almost impossible to beat. And then now they seem extremely fragile. It's really hard to gauge where they're at as a team.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of them. I don't think, first of all, that Cliff Kingsbury is a very good coach.
Yeah.
Kind of saw it last year. They played well early last year. I know Kyler is, fragile, gets banged up, but I don't know, a couple injuries. Obviously, James Conner was out last week. DeAndre's been hurt. JJ Watt not being there hurts their defensive line. But I think Kingsbury, I could see him getting fired, if they go, to the 5 seed and lose the first playoff game. And then they're, after the start to the season, I don't know. I don't believe in him. I think there was a reason his name kept coming up in all these college coaching searches. Like Cliff Kingsbury is interested in the Oklahoma job, or he's interested in the Florida job, whatever it was. I don't know that Cliff's long for the job, and I think I you look at the
But
other.
they were so good early on, though. That's like the hard part is that like they seem to rally around him. Early on, but now they've dropped 3 in a row, so it's like,
Yeah, and 4 or
yeah,
5. I think I didn't look at I don't have their schedule up, but I know they beat the Rams early. I mean, I guess Seattle hasn't been as good as we've thought. I know they play them again, I think in week 18, but
yeah.
I don't know. Are they a product of, was the early season more of a product of just not playing good teams or having everybody healthy? And now, you get into the end of the season. It kind of doesn't remind me of the Vikes a few years back when they started out 5-0 and like, people were excited, and then it kind of fell apart. And, it was just a combination of things.
Or the Steelers last year, 11-0, and
Exactly.
and then absolutely just a train wreck the final, run.
And you kind of saw that with the Steelers, like, they were even struggling with teams where you're like, they're better than this team. And then they kept pulling it out. And then they finally ended up losing that home game to Washington.
Yeah, that's what set everything in motion, and they dropped 3 of their last 4.
Like, who did Arizona lose to a couple weeks back where you were like, what?
Yeah, well, they lost to the Lions 2 weeks ago.
There you go.
30-12 too.
I mean, it was like, and that's the one I think where everybody's like, wait, what? Like, I know the Lions have been playing better, but they got dominated. Dominated by the Lions.
Absolutely dominated. And they got dominated by the Panthers not too long ago either, like a little over a month ago. So
that's the one. It was Cam's first game. That's the one I'm thinking of. Where you're like, wait, what? At home, they're in Arizona. Cam's first game, and they gave up like 33 to the Panthers, and everybody, I think that's the one that gave.
There's a lot of questions, and they have to go on the road to the Cowboys next week, and then they take on Seattle, who's gonna be pissed, in the final game of the year. They're gonna have something to say about. They're not just gonna fold. So I mean, the Cardinals could end up being 10-7 after all this is said and done. After such an incredible start to the year. That's crazy to think about, and they may be pushed into a wild card spot, even further down, because right now they're in a wild card spot, and it doesn't look like they're going to need the Rams to implode and the 49ers to cool off for a bit. But that kind of does bring me to that, because so we have the 49ers and the Eagles in the 6 and 7 spot there. Obviously the Vikings are right there hovering a game out. The Falcons somehow still in this thing, and the Saints there too. Where it stands right now with the 49ers and the Eagles at the 6 and 7, is that, do you think that's kind of probably how this thing's going to end up too? Or do you see the Vikings somehow pushing themselves into this, or, Atlanta or New Orleans somehow getting in there too?
Honestly, I think New Orleans gets in. As long as Taysom Hill's back, I mean, they've been a competent defensive team, even last night. Like, I'm more surprised
they kept themselves in that one. Sure.
Right. I mean, you don't give up a pick 6 right away to begin the game. They're keeping them in the game. The issue is they haven't scored offensive touchdown in what, like 8, 9, 10 quarters now.
Yeah.
But they play I think they play Atlanta and Carolina. And Carolina this week, who knows what happens with the COVID stuff. So they should beat Carolina, and then it's Atlanta at the end of the season, I believe.
Yes, you are correct.
I think they have the easiest path to sneak in there. I think their defensive front and their defensive scheme gives those two teams problems that I think that's the way they sneak in. And then as far as the other, 6 or 7 seed, I think it's probably down to San Francisco and Philly.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the Jimmy G injury kind of throws everything up in the air, because I believe this week it's maybe the Texans and the Niners, and obviously the Niners should win that game whether they have Jimmy G or not.
Yeah.
But the game, then the Niners, I know, close the season in LA. They played LA tough and they've beaten them a bunch. LA might be playing for something, they might not be. So that's one where the Niners are I don't know. The Niners and Philly to me, I don't like as a team. I don't think they're that good.
Yeah.
And I mean, quite frankly, like, They play Dallas at the end, which they might benefit from Dallas not having anything to play for. It's one of
That's
that's
true. If
what,
Dallas has the 1 seed for sure, but yeah, even if the 1 seed's out of reach, the Dallas doesn't really care if they're the 2 or 3. I would imagine.
yeah, and I don't think you're gonna see teams in that 2, 3, 4 position, especially if they have any injuries.
Yeah,
Like they're not gonna worry about that. They'd rather have their guys get healthy. If they don't get a bye anyway, well, let's just sit this guy out. Having a week off is going to be more beneficial than going from the 3 to the 2 seed, or more so the 4 to the 4 to the 3 seed, because you're only going to get one home game as a 4 or 3 seed anyway. Now the 2 seed, you get a couple home games, so maybe that matters a little bit. But the 3 or the 4, you're opening up at home and then you're going on the road. So if you can't get to that 2 seed, why? Especially Cowboys have an offensive line that's banged up. Why play a couple offensive linemen if you can get them healthy for the playoffs versus playing in week 18 in Philly? So that's where Philly could benefit from that, or San Francisco if LA doesn't have anything to play for. So those 2 teams, to me, that's kind of where I think probably the 7 seed, 6, 7 seed gets into play with New Orleans.
for sure. Yeah, no, that'll be interesting. It's going to be tough for the Vikings since they have the Packers coming up. If they get that 9 losses, I mean, it's hard to see an 8-win team making this playoffs, considering the 49ers and the Eagles already have those 8 wins. They just got to win 1 out of the final 2 weeks. And I mean, it's crazy that Atlanta's somehow still in it, given what they've kind of gone through this year. But yeah, I would say the dark horse out of all of those would be New Orleans. I would agree with you there. As long as they can get Taysom Hill back and have some semblance of an offense, they have a shot. In terms of the AFC, I mean, I guess there's probably not a whole lot to say about the Chiefs. They're in the 1 seed, so and they've just been on a roll after having a rough start to the year. I think 1-3, and now they're 11-4. An impressive run as of late. But also it's not surprising, right? I mean, they still have that offensive firepower and their defense is playing a lot better. So, I mean, to me, they're the team to beat in the AFC. They're so clearly the best team in the AFC. Whereas in the NFC, we're not sure. And there's a lot of good teams at the top. The AFC is extremely top heavy, and the rest anything could happen, right? Like, really could go any way outside of that. But it looks like the road to the Super Bowl is going to have to go through Arrowhead once again. And the Chiefs probably are the most dangerous team given how good that offense is.
This reminds me, and we've texted and talked throughout the season, it just reminds me of the Brady teams when they'd get a couple early season losses. Everybody'd say, is this it for the Brady and the Patriots? Is this done? Is the dynasty over? And then they'd rattle off 10 of 11, and they're the 1 seed. They're playing the Saturday night game after getting the bye. They beat the team by 40, and then they host, at Gillette for the AFC Championship game. I just feel like it's a similar script. Like Kansas City needed to figure some things out. Obviously, getting Melvin Ingram from Pitt has made a difference, and you can speak to that. But I think that's that coupled with they're taking care of the football. That's why they're winning. Like obviously, teams, it's hard to win when you turn the ball over, and they improved their defensive front. Their defense wasn't great, but the defense was put in bad positions, against Tennessee in those games early where Mahomes had a bunch of turnovers early. Like when they don't do that, they're like you said, head and shoulders above everybody else in the AFC.
Yeah. Yeah. And their road, I mean, they do on the road these final 2 weeks at Cincinnati and at Denver. Not the easiest games for sure. And Bengals have been playing really good as of late. So it's not inconceivable to see them potentially going 0-2, although I doubt it. They're on an 8-game win streak. They'll probably split these next 2 games at, worst and get themselves to that 12-win threshold, which I think is going to be good enough to hold on to that 1 seed. It's weird that the Titans are still the 2 seed, given just how they've really been scratching and clawing to stay alive. Pretty much since Derrick Henry goes down, and then the team has kind of just survived since then. It's really seemed like a crawling their way to the 2 seed, so to speak, so far. And they got the Dolphins and the Texans the next 2 weeks, so a pretty good slate there for Tennessee. But I don't know, like, are you convinced with Tennessee, or are they a team that you think are going to be one and done in the playoffs?
I think, last week impressed me because of how bad they looked early. against the Niners. Like their offense looked awful. They looked like it was going to be a pretty sound victory for San Francisco, and then they made adjustments, and then it was a completely different team. I know last year, obviously, they got beat by Lamar first round. I just think they have people have bought into Vrabel and the way they play, very Belichickian. I think he's probably the most like Bill Belichick of any coach right now in the league, just the way his team is built, the way they play. I don't think they'll be one and done. I don't think they are a Super Bowl contender really in the AFC. Like I know they've beat Buffalo. I don't think they're a good matchup with Indianapolis. They seem to they've had some good battles the last couple of years. I just don't think they're a great matchup, and I don't think they're a great matchup for the way this Kansas City team's built. So, I think maybe there may be a win the first round, lose the second round type of team. They could sneak to the AFC Championship game. For some reason, I just don't think. Obviously, the health of Derrick Henry matters, big,
right?
But I don't know. I just think you see it kind of some of these games where they just end up getting beat because they're not as talented or not as maybe deep, especially defensively. I think they have some good players, but sometimes their overall defensive scheme, they give up plays, they give up chunk yardage. I don't know what it is about them, but that seems to have happened in the playoffs the last couple of years, especially the later they get in the round.
They have the Dolphins and the Texans, as you mentioned. So, they could conceivably split these next two games. The Dolphins aren't an easy out there. And oddly, the Chiefs are the only ones that have clinched a playoff spot. So the Titans could still conceivably not make the playoffs. Although I think given, some of the things you said there, just the way they play and things like that, they're going to find their way in. And whether or not they get Derrick Henry back, I think will change kind of the perspective on what their odds are of making a run. I think they're a team that I wouldn't trust if they're down early. I don't think they're built to battle from behind. I think they're built to try and, control the time of possession and work their way. The Patriots are very similar. And you mentioned that they're, coached very similarly, and they're also in similar positions there. So that will be interesting to see, but they are in the 2 seed right now. And, they, for all intents and purposes, like control their own destiny in that regard. The Bengals are right after them in the 3 seed. They've been, I wouldn't say super surprising to me because I really felt that Joe Burrow and this offense was going to be good, but I thought they were a year away from being legitimate contenders, but they've really accelerated that clock and have the AFC North right now, although it's still up for grabs, but they are in that top spot in the 3 seed here, playing really good football. I mean, Joe Burrow looked great this past weekend and just made some incredible throws. Joe Mixon, has been one of the better running backs in all of football this year. A lot of things clicking for them, not to mention, the defense playing really well. Trey Hendrickson has been a huge bright spot for them on that defensive line. Their biggest issue, though, Adam, is they have the Chiefs next and then go on the road at Cleveland to end the regular season. Those are going to be obviously 2 huge implicating games in terms of the whole playoff picture, not just for the Bengals. Do you think that their road to the AFC North is still paved, I guess, in Cincinnati, given how they've been performing, even though they have a tough schedule ahead here? Because remember, the Steelers play the Browns, and then the Steelers and the Ravens play each other the final week. Like, they could all beat up on each other. Meanwhile, Cincinnati, gets the Browns in the final week of the season. It really could come down to week 18.
Cincinnati's my team. Like they might not make the playoffs. I think they're the classic young team. They played up. They get hyped when they play the Steelers, when they play the Ravens. They look like world beaters, and then Cleveland goes into Cincinnati and beats them by 30, or the Chargers hang 40 something on them, right? Like, and that's just a young team. They're just a young team. They also don't have a great offensive line. It's better, still not great. I think Trey Hendrickson has obviously helped their defensive front a lot this season. I think they lose both these next two games. I think Cleveland's pass rush, Cleveland's defense frustrates Burrow. Obviously, they're going to have to score to beat them. And I just think the way the Browns are built right now, they don't match up with them. They don't match up with their defensive line. They're not great at stopping the run. You saw in their first game, they got down and the Browns kind of just put their foot on their neck. And I think that's Cincinnati is a team to me, partially with who they have to play, but also with just the way they're built. I don't know. They could get into the 6th seed, but I don't think they're going to win the division. And I think they'll lose the next two games.
Dang, that's a bold take right there. But I don't necessarily disagree. I think they look to me like a playoff team in terms of how they're playing, but that is such a tough schedule ahead that really could eat into it. But I think this team gets in. Personally, I think they end up winning the North because I think they lose to the Chiefs and I think they beat the Browns in the final week. It's hard to beat a team twice in the year, and the way the Browns have just been struggling along, that's what would give me pause about them. But I mean, your scenario is definitely not out of the realm of possibility. And with a young team with a younger head coach as well, that leaves things up to question about how they'll rise to the occasion when their backs are against the wall. And really, they haven't been used to being in this position for quite some time to actually drive it home and finish this thing out. The Bills are one spot behind them in the 4 seed there. The throws that Josh Allen I remember a few years ago when we were talking because Wyoming played Iowa, right? And you went to cover the game. And I remember you saying, like, I just don't know about this Josh Allen kid. Like, it's erratic and not super accurate. And that was consensus for most people going into the draft. And I mean, the way he's playing now is unbelievable. The throws he made off his back foot, spot on, opposite, throwing against his body. The guy just makes plays happen. And now they're on a roll in the 4 seed right now. But on top of the Patriots for the division at the time at 9-6, although that division could still go either way. I think personally the Bills hang on here, given that they play the Falcons and the Jets the next 2 weeks. And, I think they're going to be AFC East champs. Do you feel like they're going to stick in that spot, or do you think the Patriots are going to find a way to usurp them in these final couple weeks, given that Buffalo does have the tiebreaker over them currently?
Yeah, I think they'll win the division. The problem with the Bills is they don't match up with some of the teams they might have to play. They don't match up with Tennessee, and they don't match up with Indianapolis. You saw that a few weeks back. And I think that to me is the biggest worry for Buffalo. Like if they get New England or they get Cincinnati or Cleveland or some, one of those teams first round, like that's okay. I mean, even Cleveland might be a tough matchup for them. I think they're fine because they'll be at home, but they're going to probably have to play 2 of those teams, I think. And I don't, that's to me, their biggest issue is stopping the run and not getting down early. Like Josh Allen is going to do what he does. I don't know. I like the Bills. I think they're talented. Their matchups to me aren't great for a long postseason run. And I think that's even if they win the division or they're the wild card, like it does, either way, I think they might have a tough time getting to Arrowhead if that's what it comes down to. Like I just, they don't run the football well. There's a few things they don't do well that you would think playoff Super Bowl contenders need to do one or the other, and not being able to run and not stopping the run very well, that's concerning. And I think, I think that New England game a few weeks back was a fluke in terms of like, nobody's going to play that way against them, but
and the weather was so crazy,
the more telltale was the way just Indianapolis kind of pushed them around in Buffalo, right? Like that's the one to me where like, if you get Derrick Henry back and you're playing the Bills, or, if you're Indy and you're doing that again, I mean, Indy went up there last year and almost beat them. So those 2 teams, especially to me, are kind of kryptonite for the Bills. Like I think they'll win the last 2 games. They'll probably be the 3 seed, I would think, but that might mean New England. That might mean Indy. Like that could be their first round matchups. And, as much as I don't believe in Mac Jones, I don't know that the Bills want to play New England a third time.
Yeah, and Mark and I have talked pretty much all season long about how one-dimensional they are, and that is that's a problem when you inevitably need to win in a variety of ways, given those matchups. Like you were saying, based on your matchup, you're going to have to win one way or the other. It's like
Yep.
I know that they liken themselves, and want to be, similar to how the Chiefs are, but it's like the Chiefs are such an anomaly, and even the Chiefs' weapons are even way better than Buffalo's, even though Buffalo has
Mhm.
great weapons. It's like they don't have Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. Stephon Diggs is great,
Yep.
but and the Chiefs lately have actually been running the ball pretty well too. Like they can find a way to get through that. I think that's going to be tough for Buffalo. They're still a really good team. I can easily see them in the AFC Championship, but I don't see them overcoming enough to be able to win, 3 games in the postseason against, whoever they're going to be matched up against. Given what you said, some of these teams that are just problems, and the Colts are one of those. They're in the 5 seed right now. The Patriots, the 6, Dolphins, the 7. As we stand right now, that's where we sit. That's an interesting mix right there because given that no one's clinched a playoff, so many things can switch, and yet I'm not sure how much is going to change in the AFC picture because I think the teams that are there right now make sense. Outside of, I think, while I'm not super convinced that the Chargers are a team that can make a run in the playoffs, I think they're a team that probably deserves to get in and will get in over like Miami, let's say. Um, Other than that, Adam, I don't know. The Ravens have been spiraling and they've been ravaged by injuries. The Steelers, I mean, I don't think anyone should have much faith in them. And they've got 2 divisional games coming up. And then, the Raiders are, they've been the Raiders. The Browns have been like no one's playing really well. So to me, the way it's structured right now with the Colts and the Patriots getting in there, I don't know. I mean, I see them both in. Or do you see a lot of these on the bubble teams making their way into that picture?
100% agree. I think it's down to basically a 7 seed. Like I think New England's in, Colts will be in. New England plays Miami. I don't know that game will mean that.
That'll be a huge game.
I don't
That's
know
going
that
to be
game
the
will mean
game.
if New England wins this week. I don't know it'll mean that much to New England is the issue.
Well, no, it'll mean
to
for Miami though. It'll
Yeah.
mean, it'll definitely play a factor in terms of who, if Miami wants to stamp their foot on that 7th seed, essentially.
I think that you're probably right about the Chargers just because they're up a game. They're up a game in the win column right now on like what they're up a game on Cleveland and they're up a game on
Pittsburgh
Vegas,
as well, and
Pittsburgh, like all those teams, even Baltimore too, I think. So I think the Chargers can get to 10 wins. I still think my interesting team is Cleveland. I know they have 2 divisional games and they're 2 tough games. Man, I just think if they get any quarterback play, you look at the games they've lost recently, like that's what it's been.
That's been a tough road for them. So.
I mean, at Baltimore, they should have won. At Green Bay, they needed quarterback play. And I know Baker's not 100% healthy, but like the rest of that team is built for this time of year. I mean, you saw last year, right? Like they went into Pittsburgh and beat it. I know Pittsburgh was overrated, but they throttled them. Like they have the pieces and the scheme, I think, to play well this time of year. I just don't know if they have the quarterback to do it. So they're the only interesting team to me that could sneak in, whether it's winning the North or, I guess I think their only way in is winning the North because they'd have to win 2 games. And I think at that point they would probably, they'd for sure be in over Cincinnati and Pittsburgh because they beat them. But I don't know where it'd stand with Baltimore, if they would possibly be a wild card and flip flop with Baltimore, but they're a team that's interesting. Otherwise, I'm with you. I think it probably comes down to the Chargers and the Dolphins for that last spot. The Dolphins to me are, I don't know. I know they've won a bunch in a row. I just don't think, I think when you watch them, their defense is good, but I don't know. Tua is efficient.
They're one of those teams too that's kind of felt like Tennessee. Like they don't play necessarily the same, but like a team that's scraping by, right? Like they've kind of pulled out some of these wins by the skin of their teeth. But it is worth noting the first and only team in NFL history to have a 7-game losing streak and a 7-game winning streak. Pretty impressive turnaround nonetheless. I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about Brian Flores being on the hot seat to start the year. I mean, I don't know. Now it seems like at the very least this team plays for Brian Flores. I mean,
Yeah.
he found a way to get this team to respond despite being 1-7. That's tough to do. I mean, a lot of teams can quit easily with that. They have fought and they've battled, and now they have themselves in a position where they could be in the playoffs.
I mean, he's the opposite of the dude at the Giants, right? Like, I don't think the Giants roster is that much less. It's less talented offensively, but Giants have some pieces on defense. They're okay.
Mm-hmm.
They have but that's the opposite. Like, I think Joe Judge is in over his head and doesn't, I don't think the guys play for him. I think they play for Flores. I agree with you there. I just don't know that they feel like they're just still limited on offense to me. And I don't know if it's because they don't have a good running game. If they something just to me is, I don't know. When I watch them, a couple times I've watched them. I guess they're probably one of the teams I haven't watched as much, but catching them a little last night in a weird game, something for me just doesn't feel like they're a team that like should be in the playoffs. Now they might make it, but I don't know why there's still one piece, still something missing from them on their offensive side of the ball. Whereas I think the Chargers when they're healthy are a playoff team. But you saw last week when they missed their 2 defensive players, they're one of the worst. It doesn't matter how good their offensive is. When Derwin James and Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa don't play.
Yeah, they're pretty reliant on
that. They're terrible.
Yeah, because that offense can, and that's been surprising because a couple of years ago the Chargers defense was great.
Yeah.
And now they've the past couple of years they've definitely regressed, and part of that's injury, but part of it's just bad. They, for whatever reason, they haven't executed. The problem for Miami is that they go on the road to Tennessee and they take on the Patriots. Like they take on 2 teams that are also scrapping and fighting for a playoff spot. So it's definitely going to be a battle of wills the next 2 weeks. And I think those games are going to be, probably next week against Tennessee is going to tell us where Miami's going to be. If they win at Tennessee, get to 9 wins, then okay. Like now you host New England with with basically your playoff chances in your hands. So that's going to be
really physical football teams too, though.
Yeah.
Like even if they get in, like they're going to be beat up. Like that's 2 weeks in a row. Then you have to go on the road and play, possibly play Tennessee again or play Buffalo. To me, that progression, even if they get in, that's not grounds for doing much in the opening round of the playoffs. Yeah.
And I hear you. So I think we're on the same page there in terms of how these things will shake out. But it's always a crazy race to the end. And now with this added extra week and the way that the NFL schedules these, divisional games at the end of the season, there's so much in play the final 2 weeks, which makes it awesome and fun to watch. But also, puts the pressure on teams every single week to have to win. And,
do you see it with Cleveland, or am I just grasping for straws here?
No, I don't, because, I did coming into the year. I thought they were going to be a 6 seed and, find a way. I had Baltimore winning the division, and I felt confident about that until just the mass with all the injuries they've had. It's so hard to win, consistently. Now Cleveland, it's, most part of it is Baker. He's obviously injured, but it's also, he can't, they can only win one way as well. And that's, running the football constantly and maybe getting, a strip sack from Myles Garrett or something like that to be able to really, consistently win games. And they're going to have to pass. Like eventually, a lot of these teams, like in the AFC, especially Chiefs, Bengals, Bills, like those 3 teams right there are offensive firepowers. Like how are you going to match them? And that's the problem with a lot of these teams on the bubble too. I just don't see it. The Raiders can't match that. The Steelers couldn't match that. So you have to be able to score points.
If Cleveland gets down, like we've talked about with some other teams, they're not going to play from behind. They're just not. That's just not the way they're built.
No, they tend to fall apart and implode in those situations. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't buy them. And while it is a wide open race, I think kind of what we said that we're already kind of seeing what the playoff picture is likely going to be.
The other team I'd written down, I don't think I'm not even thinking about them, but like, what if Lamar comes back? What about Baltimore? Like, we didn't say a word about them, right? And they could win we didn't and win the division in theory, or at least get into the playoffs.
Obviously Lamar has that capability any given day and any given game to wreak havoc. And Mark Andrews has been lights out this year. Their problem is they haven't really been able to run the ball very well. Like Devontae Freeman's had some games here and there, but they just have a bunch of dudes, right? Like their running game is Lamar Jackson. Marquise Brown, talented wide receiver. They got the rookie Bateman and stuff like that. Like they have the pieces on offense, but given how completely decimated that defense has become in the past month, that's what scares me the most with Baltimore. Because they have a really good offense, but they don't have an offense that you're comfortable like saying, oh, they could score, 42. Like, can they? I don't know. Like, because they're not really big play teams, right? Like they're just an offense that can sustain long drives, and like, Lamar can get you like a 40-yard run here and there, but like they're not a 80-yard deep ball type of team this year, whereas the Chiefs are, the Bills are, some of these teams, the Chargers can have a one-play drive easily. So if the Ravens go into the postseason, they're going to play some of these offensive teams that I feel is just a nightmare matchup for their defense.
Yeah, I agree.
That's going to be the biggest problem. But I think they could get in. Like you said, like the AFC North's wide open pretty much right now. Like Cincinnati, if they can find a way to win these next two games, then they're fine. They're clear. But we talked about, that schedule being rough. Baltimore and Pittsburgh going to play each other at the end of the year. That's probably going to come down to potentially a spot there. I think Baltimore's a playoff team like they should be, but given all of these issues, I could easily see a Chargers or a Miami getting in just because they've had a little bit more consistency in that area. So, I mean, that would be the biggest concern for me going forward with Baltimore. But they are a team that, could easily get in. And if they do, they could win a playoff game.
I think you're right on the defense, though. I think losing Humphrey really hurts them. And they're not really scaring anybody, I think, with their defense. Like they don't even have the dudes that are like, I know they have a pass rusher too. They obviously have Patrick Queen, who's a good linebacker, but you're kind of just, you're not like, whoa.
Right. Yeah. They losing Matthew Judon. You see how well he's playing in New England. I think that's been a glaring absence for that defense. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of scenarios that could play out, and I guess next week we'll really know what needs to happen. But it's becoming pretty clear right now where we stand that a lot of these teams are beating up on each other, and now it's going to come down to who gets the final punch in. And that's to me is going to be up to Miami, or it's going to be up to LA to find themselves into that final spot. Whereas the rest might just beat up on each other too much to where it doesn't matter in the long run. Because we talked about, you got to get to 10 wins. And a lot of these teams, that means they got to win out. Mm-hmm. And that's a tall task for a lot of these guys, given their schedules. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, man. I'm really looking forward to it. But is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we kind of wrap things up here?
No, that's it. Like I said, I went through some of the scenarios. I guess I'll hang my hat on Cleveland's running game. And when they lose to the Steelers this week on Monday night, that'll end that. But you never know. Yeah. That AFC North's been the weirdest vibe all year. I'll say that. That whole division's been weird. You think you got some contenders and it's not really panning out. So I honestly think the NFC is more fascinating. I think we both agree there. Like whoever wants to play Kansas City has a shot to beat them, whether it's the Colts, whether it's Tennessee, whether it's Buffalo. But I wouldn't pick the Chiefs to lose. Whereas in the NFC, I think any of those top four teams have a legitimate shot to get to the Super Bowl. So that's where it's wide open. And, one of those top four probably won't even make, at least 2 through 4, they might lose first round just because of what we talked about with the matchup and, a team that can run the ball and has a good defensive line. So who knows? But that it's way more, and it's been that way. We've known the five of the 7 playoff teams the whole season, basically, in the NFC. I mean, really, since like week 8.
Yeah. There's
kind of known who it's going to be, and there's been two positions that are going to be filled. But those top 5 teams, I think Arizona's now dropped off. But those top 4 teams have been the top 4 teams all year, and it just really depends on who stays healthy, who gets healthy, and then kind of what, I guess I would say what quarterback gets rattled.
Yeah. That's why I have more confidence. Like, the Chiefs are the only AFC team I can see winning the Super Bowl. Whereas, to your point, I could see 4 teams in the NFC winning it easily. I could see the Packers winning it. I could honestly see the Cowboys winning it.
Yeah.
I could see the Rams. I could see the Bucks. So, all those teams, like you mentioned, all right there in the top 4 seeds, all have a good shot. So if Kansas City somehow gets upset in one of these early playoff games, then I'm all NFC from there on out that the NFC is winning the Super Bowl. But, right now, the 2-1 seeds, Packers Chiefs, really does seem like a plausible scenario. But Packers do have to prove it because they've been in the championship each of the last 2 years and haven't been able to get over that hump. So intriguing scenarios here to play out in the coming weeks. But thanks, Adam, for joining us. I really appreciate it, man. It's good talking with you, getting some insight. And yeah, best of luck there in Austin with all the coverage the rest of the year, and have a happy new year.
You bet. Sounds good. You too.
All right, everyone. We'll be back here next week. Mark returns, and we'll look forward to that as we go into the final week of the regular season. Stay tuned.